The corpse was seated upright. That detail sat in every briefing, every prelim scan, every piece of documentation the Church and the Admiralty had fought over for 6 years before greenlighting this expedition. I'd read all of it, reviewed the long-range imaging myself, approved the rite of verification I was about to perform. And still, standing on the observation deck of the Requiem, looking through 40 meters of layered viewport at the thing in the galactic center, the posture disturbed me. The body held itself like a constructed object, like a chair-bound effigy. Something the size of a solar system sat in furniture, and it had been sitting there long enough for stars to learn to move around it. The Singularity Throne. That was the Church's name for the megastructure cradling the body. A vast scaffolding of materials no one had been able to identify from range, curved and braced around the supermassive black hole at the galaxy's core, like a skeletal hand gripping a dark stone. And in it, on it, part of it, the corpse. Limbs the length of planetary orbits. A torso wrapped in something that might have been armor or calcified skin. A head tipped forward a few degrees, as if it had nodded off during a long watch. I opened the rite of verification at 1400 hours, ship time. The liturgy was simple by design. A confessor marshal exists for legal classification rather than worship or communion or interpretation. My job was binary. I confirm the object is dead, inert and approachable, or I declare it hazardous and lock it down. 2 outcomes, clean paperwork either way. That which is witnessed shall be named, I began. The observation deck was built like a chapel, high ceiling, curved walls, the viewport serving as the altar window. Behind me, Brother Pell held the ceremonial logbook and a portable recorder. 12 crew witnesses lined the benches. Captain Rask watched from the bridge via internal feed. Cardinal Severin watched from the ship's chapel, surrounded by his retinue of clergy and pilgrimage officials, his face on a small screen mounted near the viewport so I could see his expression if I needed to. I didn't need to. I already knew the look he wore when he wanted something. That which is still shall be witnessed as still. The viewport light shifted. The change stayed subtle. No flare, no violent flash. The external running lights along the ship's hull, white-blue, standard, stretched. Each point of light pulled into a thin streak, a halo twice its normal length, and held there. Gravitational lensing. The kind you see near dense objects, but we were still 19,000 kilometers from the throne's estimated influence boundary. At that range, the effect should have remained negligible. Pell looked up from the logbook. I kept reading. That which is named shall be bound by its name, and that name shall be Confessor. Rask's voice cut through the deck speaker. Controlled but tight in a way that told me she was already standing. Hold your right. We're correcting drift. I couldn't hold. Stopping a verification mid-liturgy without cause counted as a breach. Spiritual and legal. The moment I paused, Cardinal Severin would have grounds to challenge my authority, claim I'd invalidated the rite through cowardice, and demand a new confessor be appointed. I'd seen that tactic used on better men over smaller objects. Continuing, I announced, for the record. Victor. Rask dropped the title. Look at nav display 4. The display was mounted at the edge of the viewport array, a flat panel showing local stellar cartography, the mapped paths of every star within 10 light-years of the throne. I'd glanced at it when I entered. Standard orbital arcs, smooth and predictable. One of them had broken pattern. A yellow dwarf, catalogued as a minor point on our approach corridor, had deviated from its plotted trajectory. The projected line kinked sharply, a hard angle instead of a curve, like someone had grabbed the star's path and bent it over a knee. The nav system had flagged it in red. Instrument error, the automatic tag read. Pell saw it too. He set the logbook down on the bench. I looked back at the viewport, at the corpse. The finger moved, one finger on the corpse's right hand, resting on the arm of the throne. A digit larger than any moon I'd ever orbited slid forward along the throne's surface. Slow. Maybe a kilometre of motion over 2 or 3 seconds. The throne's material beneath it, whatever dark, seamless substance shaped the megastructure, didn't crack or grind. The finger shifted the way a body moves in sleep, carrying its own weight with terrible ease. Then it stopped. The halos around our hull lights snapped back to normal length. The nav display's red flag on the kinked star remained. Silence settled on the observation deck. 12 witnesses staring. One of them, an older ratings officer named Tal, had his hands folded in his lap, and I watched his fingers work against each other, as if he were trying to unknot something invisible. Pell gripped the edge of the bench with both hands. Rask's voice had vanished from the speaker. On the chapel feed screen, Cardinal Severin held both palms flat against his console, his face set in the expression of a man watching his entire life validate itself. I closed the liturgy book. Under Expedition Charter, a confessor marshal has exactly 2 responses when a verification subject exhibits motion. Option 1. Classify the motion as residual, gravitational settling, material decay, mechanical artifact, and continue the rite. Option 2. Declare holy hazard and suspend all operations until a full assessment can be completed. I'd used option 2 once before, 7 years ago, on a derelict station near the Vance Reach. Small scale. A relic that turned out to be leaking radiation in a pattern that mimicked neural activity. I classified it as hazardous. The station's pilgrim community begged me to reconsider. They'd built their lives around that relic, their economy, their calendar, their children's names. I showed them mercy, gave them a 60-day window to relocate before the quarantine sealed. The radiation killed 9 of them in 42 days. 3 were children. The 60 days I'd granted out of compassion had been exactly the margin between survival and death, and I'd spent it on kindness. Tal, in the second row of benches, watched me like a man who'd served on enough ships to recognize when an officer was about to make a decision that couldn't be taken back. Holy hazard, I announced. Effective immediately. All approach operations suspended. Observation data restricted to command and confessor marshal access until further assessment. No one approaches the throne. The deck speaker crackled. Rask. Confirmed from the bridge. All stop on approach. From the chapel screen, Severin stared at me with an expression I'd be dealing with for the rest of this mission, or whatever was left of it. I left the observation deck through the aft hatch. The 12 witnesses stayed behind, some still staring at the viewport, others talking in low, clipped bursts that would turn into rumors within the hour. Pell fell in beside me without being asked. The corridor connecting the observation level to the lower operations deck ran along the ship's starboard spine, a long, slightly curved passage lined with cable conduits and emergency pressure doors every 30 meters. The Requiem was old enough that you could read its history in the walls. Original military grey plating from its first life as a naval cruiser, brass devotional fixtures bolted on during the conversion, scuff marks and welding patches from 11 years of pilgrim service. I'd walked this corridor thousands of times. Today, the overhead lights seemed to stretch a half-centimetre longer than they should, and I couldn't tell if that came from residual lensing or my own nerves. I found Hollis at the bottom of the connecting ladder, in a workspace that looked less like a navigation station and more like a weaver's loft. The Requiem employed a gravsinger, a specialist who piloted through gravitational distortion by reading the ship's physical responses to tidal forces. Where a standard navigator watched instruments, Hollis watched the ship itself. She'd strung thin filaments of wire across her station at different tensions, each one tuned to vibrate when the hull flexed in specific ways. Dust, actual dust, released from small containers mounted on the ceiling, drifted in slow clouds through the workspace, and Hollis tracked its motion the way a fisherman reads current. When I climbed down, she stood at the center of the wire array with her arms at her sides, head tilted, listening to something I couldn't hear. The filaments around her gave off faint tones as the hull flexed, a dozen different pitches at once, layered and shifting. To me it was noise. To Hollis, it was the ship talking. The star. I didn't bother with pleasantries. The one that kinked. What happened? Tidal displacement. She didn't turn around. Her fingers twitched at her sides, following vibrations the way a conductor follows instruments. The throne's local gravity shifted for about 4 seconds. Not much. A fraction of a percent. Enough to nudge a stellar trajectory off axis at close range. 4 seconds. That lines up with the finger. With the motion, yes. She turned. Hollis was a lean, weathered woman. Former merchant marine, mid-50s, with the permanently squinted look of someone who'd spent too many years reading things no instrument could properly measure. But the motion isn't what worries me. She walked to the edge of her wire array and plucked one of the lower filaments. It vibrated with a thin tone. Feel that through the deck plate. I pressed my boot flat against the floor. A faint rhythmic tremor ran up through my bones. Regular, like a heartbeat, except mechanical. Too even and precise for anything biological. That's the throne. Hollis let the wire go. It's been doing that since we entered sensor range. Constant, steady, and when the finger moved, it stuttered. Stuttered how? The interval stretched, by about half a second. Then it re-established. She crossed to a small workbench where she'd pinned a sheet of translucent film, hand-drawn, not printed. Curves and waveforms sketched in graphite. The throne isn't passive, Confessor. It's doing something, actively. That rhythm is a stabilization output. It's exerting constant pressure on the local gravity well, holding the black hole's accretion in a fixed state, and holding the body in place. I studied the hand-drawn waveforms. One line was smooth and regular, the baseline. A second line overlaid showed the same rhythm with a single visible hitch. The moment the finger moved. When we arrived, Hollis continued, the ship's mass entered the throne's influence zone. Not by much. We're still at the outer edge. But the field registered us. It adjusted. And during that adjustment, it weakened. Briefly. Just enough for the body to shift. You're telling me we caused the motion? I'm telling you the throne works like a machine, and it's working very hard to keep something still. Our presence made its job harder. She pulled a second filament, higher, tighter, and a different note sang through the workspace. She cupped her hand around one of the dust clouds drifting near the ceiling, guided it lower, and pointed at the way the particles moved. Slow, circular, all drifting in the same lazy rotation. Then she tapped the wall with her knuckle, once, hard, and the dust scattered into random vectors before gradually, over 10 or 15 seconds, reorganizing into the same rotation. That's what the throne does. Constant correction. Every particle in its range gets pulled back into order. The black hole, the body, the local rubble field. Everything held in place by continuous pressure. The structure behaves like a warden, Confessor. It keeps something where it sits. Pell had followed me down. He stood in the doorway of Hollis's station, listening, the ceremonial logbook tucked under one arm like a schoolboy carrying homework into the wrong classroom. So it's a lock, Pell offered. Quietly, the way he did when he tested whether he was allowed to speak. The throne, it serves as a lock. Hollis looked at him, looked at me. That's one way to put it. I drafted the formal Holy Hazard Declaration in my quarters with Pell's help. The language had to be precise, specific enough to hold up under canonical review, broad enough to cover what we didn't yet understand. I cited the motion event, the gravitational anomaly, the lensing effect, and Hollis's preliminary readings on the throne's active output. I filed it with the bridge and the expedition's legal recorder at 1540 hours. Pell proofread while I typed, catching two phrasings that Severin could have turned into grounds for synodal appeal. The kid had a canon lawyer's eye buried under all that earnestness. When we'd finished, He read the whole thing back to me once, and I signed it with my ship code and sealed it into the record. At 15:50, a runner arrived at my door. Young man, early 20s, wearing the grey half-robe of the cardinal's administrative staff. He carried a sealed envelope, actual paper, actual wax seal, because Severin understood the weight of physical objects in a way that made him dangerous. I broke the seal. The message was 3 lines, handwritten, "The first stirring has been witnessed. Your declaration obstructs the faithful response to a sign long awaited. I urge you, in the name of every soul aboard, to rescind before this becomes a matter for the synod." I turned the paper over. Blank. "Does he want a written reply?" I asked the runner. He looked uncomfortable. "He wants you to come to the chapel, Confessor. Tell him I'll come when my assessment is complete." "He said you'd..." "Tell him." He left. Pell closed the door and leaned against it. "He'll go to the crew." He crossed his arms. "If he can't override the declaration legally, he'll undermine it socially. Prayer gatherings, public devotions, frame the lockdown as spiritual suppression." He was right. Severin had been managing faithful populations for 30 years. He knew exactly how to turn a scared crew into a congregation, and a congregation into a mandate. I'd watched him do it during the expedition's departure ceremonies. 3 days of carefully orchestrated ritual that transformed a nervous crew into willing pilgrims. He hadn't forced anyone. He'd simply made belief the path of least resistance and doubt the loneliest position on the ship. Then we work fast. I sealed the declaration and fed the original into my quarters document safe. A small, fireproof box bolted to the bulkhead, one of the few things on this ship that was entirely mine. I need Hollis's full readings before the next watch rotation. I need the bridge telemetry on that stellar kink, whether it's propagating or isolated. And I need you to pull the expedition charter and find me every precedent for a confessor marshal holding hazard authority over a site the church has pre-classified as sacred. That's going to be a short list. Then it won't take long. Pell gathered his things and headed for the archives. At the door, he paused. "Confessor, for what it's worth." That finger didn't move like something waking up. He adjusted the logbook under his arm. It moved like something checking whether it could. He left before I could respond to that. Probably wise. I sat at my desk in the quarters I'd occupied for 11 years aboard this ship. Small, orderly, one viewport that currently showed nothing but the faint distorted glow of the Galactic center. Outside the viewport, if I could have seen through the glare and the warped light, a body the size of a solar system sat pinned to a chair by a machine older than any civilization we'd ever found. Its finger had moved 3 seconds worth. And now every soul on the Requiem sat frozen in place because I'd spoken 2 words. On the bridge, Rask would be running threat calculations and wanting a clear answer I couldn't give her. In the chapel, Severin was already composing the first of what Pell would later describe as the devotionals, prayers distributed to the crew through the ship's internal message system, each one framed as comfort, each one ending with the same line. "The still shall not remain still, and we shall be the witnesses." He was building his church inside my quarantine, and the throne, 19,000 kilometers away, kept its rhythm, the mechanical pulse Hollis had mapped, holding a dead god's body in a chair built to keep it from standing up. By the 6th hour after the declaration, Severin had turned the lower cargo chapel into a shrine. I found out on my way to the bridge. The cargo chapel was a converted hold on Deck 4. Low ceiling, bolted pews, a portable altar the church had supplied when the expedition launched. It seated about 80. When I passed it on the main corridor, walking forward toward the bridge ladder, the hatch was open and the space was packed. 120 people, maybe more, crammed into the pews and along the walls. 2 of Severin's junior clerics stood at the altar, leading a responsive reading. The congregation murmured in unison. The room held a steady, calming rhythm. Frightened people being handed meaning while they were still afraid enough to listen. I stopped at the hatch long enough to count bodies and spot faces. Crew from every section. Ratings, maintenance, galley staff. 2 of the helm auxiliaries, who should have been on standby. Members of the Bridge Watch and Hollis's team were conspicuously absent. But the numbers were bad. 1/3 of the ship's complement, roughly, gathered in a space meant for half that, reciting words Severin had written. "The still shall not remain still." One of the clerics noticed me. He didn't stop reading, but his eyes tracked me the way a sentry tracks movement on a perimeter. I kept walking. On the bridge, Rask waited at the command table with the navigational officer and a star chart I hadn't seen before. The chart was fresh, updated in the last 2 hours using the ship's long-range telemetry array, which could track stellar motion across several transit corridors even from our position near the Galactic center. "Sit down, Confessor." I didn't sit. I leaned over the table and looked at the chart. The kinked star, the yellow dwarf whose trajectory had broken during the rite, was still flagged in red, but it no longer stood alone. Rask's navigational officer had overlaid the trajectories of every catalogued star within a 50 light-year radius of the throne, updating in near real time as the telemetry came in. 7 more stars showed deviations, small ones, nothing as sharp as the original kink, but measurable, each trajectory bowing slightly outward from the throne's position, as if something at the center had pushed them. Propagation pattern. Rask traced the deviations with her finger. The affected stars formed a rough ring expanding outward from the throne. The gravitational disturbance from that 4-second event is moving outward at the speed you'd expect for a tidal wave through stellar medium, slow by light speed standards. Fast enough to reach the Alneri corridor in, she glanced at the navigational officer, 14 months. He was a thin man named Drace, precise in the way people who spend their careers measuring things tend to be. Possibly 12, depending on local density. The Alneri corridor was one of the major shipping and transit lanes connecting the inner colonies to the Galactic arm settlements. Hundreds of stations, millions of people. If the stellar drift reached that corridor with enough force to shift orbital mechanics even slightly, navigation would become unpredictable. Ships would miss their transit windows. Stations built around stable star systems would find those systems shifting under them. And that was from one 4-second event, one finger shifting a kilometer. If the corpse moves again, Rask went on, and the displacement is larger, we're looking at cascade effects across multiple corridors, not in years, in months. She let that sit. I need a decision I can act on, Victor. Stay and try to stop this, or run and warn everyone in the path. Those are my 2 options, and both of them start with you telling me what your assessment says. My assessment isn't finished. Then finish it. You have until next watch rotation. 8 hours. She pulled the chart back toward herself. After that, I'm making a navigational decision with or without your hazard classification, and if that means overriding your authority, I'll do it and answer to the Synod later. I left the bridge with the propagation pattern lodged in my head like a splinter. 14 months to the Alneri corridor. 1 finger's worth of motion. And the throne's rhythm, Hollis's steady pulse through the deck plates, served as the only thing standing between that finger and whatever came after it. The corridor between the bridge and the lower decks was busier than usual. Crew moved in small clusters, talking in the half-whispered, half-urgent way people use when they know something is wrong but haven't been told what. A pair of maintenance techs passed me carrying toolkits, and one of them, a heavy-set man named Brunt, whom I'd counseled through a grief episode 6 months earlier, gave me a look that was part question, part accusation. Word of the holy hazard had spread. Word of the cargo chapel gatherings had spread faster. I climbed down 2 decks to Hollis's station. The ladder rungs were cold under my hands. Somewhere above me, Severin's devotional was probably circulating through the message system again, and somewhere below me, the throne was reaching for something it couldn't find. Hollis's workspace had changed in 6 hours. She'd added more filaments to the wire array, dozens of them now, crisscrossing the station at different heights and tensions, some so fine I could barely see them. The dust containers on the ceiling had been repositioned, and Hollis herself had cleared the workbench of everything except a single large sheet of translucent film, covered in new hand-drawn waveforms. She started talking before I'd finished climbing down the ladder. The rhythm is cycling, not steady, cycling. There's a contraction pattern. Every 40 minutes, the throne's stabilization output increases sharply, holds for about 90 seconds, then drops back to baseline. During the contraction, the field tightens. During the release, it loosens. Like breathing, like a pump. A mechanical pump that keeps trying to complete a circuit and failing. She pointed at the waveform on the film. A regular pattern of peaks and valleys, but each peak was followed by a sharp, abortive spike that cut off before reaching the top of the graph. See this? Every contraction, the field reaches for something, pulls inward, and every time it falls short. It doesn't have enough. Enough what? Mass. She walked me to the center of the wire array. The filaments sang faintly around us, a constant shifting chord that I was starting to recognize as the ship's translation of the throne's output. Hollis reached up and pinched one of the higher wires between 2 fingers, dampening it. The throne's stabilization architecture has a gap, a structural absence. The field is designed to anchor itself against a specific mass density at a specific point in its geometry. Think of it like a keystone in an arch. Without that keystone, the arch holds, but it flexes, it leaks, and every cycle, the flex gets a fraction wider. What kind of mass? She let the wire go. It vibrated once, high and thin, then settled. The throne's material signature includes a sanctified composite. You know what that means. Hull plating that's been through the church's consecration process. The reactor core of any church-commissioned vessel uses the same base alloy. She paused. The Requiem's reactor core is a near-exact match for the throne's material signature, and the remaining mass gap, the difference between the core alone and what the field is reaching for, matches the biological displacement of this ship's full crew complement. The wire array hummed around us. Dust drifted in slow spirals near the ceiling. You're saying the throne needs our ship? I'm saying the throne needs mass with the right density and composition in the right place. Our ship happens to fit that specification. It isn't destiny or summons. It's simple compatibility, the way a bolt fits a thread if the gauge matches, no matter who made the bolt. I looked at the waveform on the film. The abortive spikes, the field reaching, contracting, falling short. 40-minute cycles. Every one of them a mechanical hand grasping for something to hold and closing on empty space. If the ship, core and crew were placed at the anchor point, the field would complete its circuit. The contractions would stop. The stabilization would lock. Full seal. The corpse wouldn't move again. She folded her arms. Not until the next time something degraded anyway. Could be centuries. Could be longer. And if the ship alone, core, no crew? Partial seal. The contractions would slow. The field would stabilize enough to hold the corpse for decades, maybe. But the gap would still exist. The arch would still flex. The difference between centuries and decades, between permanent repair and a patch, and the difference between those two outcomes equaled roughly 400 living people. I thanked Hollis and climbed the ladder back to the main corridor. Halfway up, the ship shuddered. A single brief tremor that ran through the rungs and up through my wrists. Another contraction, the throne reaching, grasping, closing on nothing. 40 minutes since the last one, give or take. I paused on the ladder, hands locked on the rungs, and waited until the tremor passed. Then I kept climbing. I found Pell in the archive alcove off the main corridor on Deck 2, a closet-sized space lined with data terminals and hard-copy document cabinets. He'd been at it for hours. The expedition charter was spread across the terminal screen in front of him, but he'd also pulled physical files from the cabinets, original mission planning documents, pre-departure correspondence, risk assessments filed during the expedition's approval phase. He looked up when I ducked through the narrow hatch. His face had the pale, drawn quality of someone who'd found something he wished he hadn't. The charter precedents are thin. 2 prior cases of a confessor marshal holding hazard authority over a church sacred site. Both were overturned by the synod within 90 days. He pushed the charter aside. But that's not what I need to show you. He pulled a hard copy file from the stack beside the terminal. Cream-colored paper, official church letterhead, stamped with the cardinal's diocesan seal. Pre-departure correspondence between Cardinal Severin and the church's Astro-Theological Commission. The body that had authorized the expedition. 3rd page, 2nd paragraph. I read it. The language was formal, layered with ecclesiastical phrasing, but the substance was plain enough. The commission had briefed Severin on 3 theoretical models of the Singularity Throne's function, based on long-range observation data accumulated over decades. Model 1, the throne as a devotional monument. Model 2, the throne as an astronomical instrument. Model 3, the throne as a restraint mechanism, actively suppressing motion in the seated body. Severin had been shown all 3 models. He'd signed an acknowledgement, and he'd chosen to present the expedition to the crew, the public, and the Admiralty exclusively under Model 1, the monument. He knew, Pell said, before we launched. He knew there was a real possibility the throne was a prison, and he buried it. Why? Read the next page. The next page was Severin's reply to the commission, handwritten, which meant he'd bypassed his secretarial staff. The language shifted, less formal, more personal. He argued that Model 3, if true, represented the greatest possible vindication of faith, proof that the divine was real, physical, and restrained, which meant it could be freed. He described the potential release of the corpse as the restoration of cosmic meaning to a universe that has operated under enforced absence. He hadn't come here hoping to find a dead god. He'd come hoping to find one that could be unchained. The Cardinal's quarters were on Deck 3, portside, larger than mine, fitted with a private chapel alcove and a sitting area where he received visitors. A guard stood outside, one of Severin's personal staff, not ship security. He let me in without resistance. Severin was expecting me. He probably knew about the pre-departure correspondence the moment Pell pulled it from the archive. He sat in the alcove, a cup of tea on the small table beside him. The private chapel behind him held a single devotional screen showing a live feed of the throne. My data restriction applied to official observation channels. But Severin had access to the chapel's own external camera array, which I hadn't thought to lock down. An oversight. His face showed no sign of being caught off guard. It was the calm of a man who had been waiting for this conversation and had already decided how it would go. You knew the throne functioned as a restraint. I didn't sit down. Before launch, the commission briefed you on Model 3. The commission briefed me on 3 possibilities, yes. One of which was Model 3, and you buried it. I prioritized the model supported by the strongest devotional tradition and the broadest institutional consensus. He lifted the tea, sipped, set it back down. Model 1 had centuries of theological foundation. Model 3 was speculative. Model 3 is confirmed. The throne actively stabilizes the corpse. Its field is degrading, and our ship, our reactor core, our crew, is structurally compatible with the missing component of that stabilization system. He didn't flinch. That told me everything. You already knew that too. I suspected it. The Commission's physicists included mass compatibility calculations in the Model 3 appendix. Theoretical, unconfirmed. His hands rested in his lap, steady. But yes, I considered the possibility that a church vessel, sanctified hull, consecrated core, might be what the throne required. And I considered what that would mean. What it would mean is 400 people used as construction material. What it would mean is 400 souls completing the purpose for which the divine designed them. No heat in his voice. No fanaticism. Certainty delivered with the calm of someone who'd had years to make peace with this arithmetic. Victor, you've spent your career putting procedure between yourself and faith. Quarantine lines, hazard classifications, legal codes. And every time, every single time, the sacred has broken through your procedures and left you holding the consequences. He meant the Vance reach. He meant the 9 dead. He meant the children. I'm not asking you to sacrifice anyone. I'm asking you to recognize that we are already where we were meant to be, and the only question left is whether you will allow meaning, or whether you will, once again, choose the option that lets you sleep at night while the universe pays the price. I left. The conversation was over. There was nothing in that room I could argue with because Severin wasn't arguing. He was describing a world he'd already accepted, and in that world, I was the obstacle. Not the saboteur, not the enemy, just the small, frightened man standing between humanity and what he called its purpose. The guard outside his quarters watched me go. I walked the port corridor forward, past crew quarters where people were sleeping or pretending to sleep, past the secondary galley where 2 cooks prepared the next watch's meal in silence, past a junction where someone had taped a handwritten copy of Severin's devotional to the wall. The still shall not remain still, and we shall be the witnesses. The paper was already starting to curl at the edges. Rask was in the bridge's tactical alcove when I found her, a cramped side room with a single reinforced hatch used for conversations that couldn't be overheard. She'd cleared the room of everyone except Drace, who stood by the far wall with his arms crossed and his mouth shut. I told her everything. Hollis's mass gap calculation, the anchor point compatibility, full seal with ship and crew, partial seal with ship alone, Severin's foreknowledge, the buried Model 3 briefing, the Cardinal's conviction that the crew's death would be a completion, not a sacrifice. Rask listened without interrupting. When I finished, she looked at Drace. The propagation math holds? He nodded. 14 months to Alneri at current displacement. If the corpse moves again, anything larger than the finger, it drops to single digits. Months, not years. Rask turned back to me. Severin's people disabled the forward observation cameras on Deck 6 an hour ago. My security chief found the damage during a routine sweep. They're not trying to break your quarantine physically. They're blinding us, one system at a time, so that when they move, we won't see it coming. Move to do what? Force the ship into the anchor point with everyone aboard. Full seal, full sacrifice. He doesn't need to convince you. He just needs to disable enough systems that we can't pull away and let the Throne's field do the rest. We're already drifting closer, 0.5 kilometer per hour, corrected by thrusters on automatic. If someone kills the thruster automation, the drift takes over. The tactical alcove was small enough that I could hear the Throne's rhythm through the hull, that faint 40-minute pulse, the contraction reaching for mass it didn't have. Reaching for us. You have 2 options. Rask put both hands flat on the table. Full seal. Everyone dies, the throne locks, and the galaxy is safe for centuries. Partial seal. We evacuate, send the ship in with just the core, and buy decades. Maybe enough time for someone smarter than us to find a real fix. Maybe not. She straightened. I can execute either one. I can't choose. That's your authority, your right, your hazard. And if I don't choose, then Severin chooses for all of us, and he's already made his pick. She held my gaze for a long 5 seconds, then walked out of the alcove with Drace behind her. The hatch sealed. I stood in the tactical alcove alone, the Throne's pulse ticking through the deck beneath my boots, and understood with perfect clarity that the last piece of neutral ground I'd been standing on had just been pulled out from under me. The next choice I made would either use 400 people as mortar in a cosmic lock, or let a dead god's smallest movement unravel the shipping lanes and colonies of an entire galactic arm. And the only reason I was the one making it was because 7 years ago, I'd chosen mercy, and mercy had killed 9 people in the Vance Reach, and the Church had decided that made me the right man to hold the line when mercy stopped being an option. The deck kicked sideways under me hard enough to throw my shoulder into the alcove wall. A deep structural groan ran through the hull, the sound of a ship lurching off its heading, harsher and more ragged than the throne's measured pulse. Rask's voice came over the internal comm before I'd found my footing. "All hands brace. Uncontrolled drift. Repeat. Uncontrolled drift. Engineering report." I grabbed the hatch handle and pulled myself into the bridge corridor. The overhead lighting had shifted to amber, loss of attitude warning. Crew moved past me in both directions, some heading to stations, others just moving because standing still felt worse. I reached the bridge in 30 seconds. Rask stood at the command table, gripping the edge with one hand while the navigational display updated in front of her. The Requiem's position marker slid, slowly, but visibly, toward the throne's mapped influence boundary. 3 of Severin's people. Rask didn't look up. "Hit the primary maneuvering thruster couplings during the watch change. Cut the hydraulic feeds to the main gimbal array. We have secondaries, but they're corrective. Not enough to reverse a tidal pull at this proximity." "Where are they now?" "Security has 2 in custody on Deck 5. The 3rd locked himself in Thruster Access Bay 7. Security cut him out within minutes. He was still praying." She looked up. "The damage is done, Victor. Secondaries can slow the drift. Maybe buy us 6 hours. But we're inside the throne's pull radius now, and without primaries, we don't have the thrust to break free." Through the bridge viewport, the throne hung closer than it had an hour ago. The corpse's outline, that vast silhouette of limbs and torso and bowed head, filled more of the visible sky now. Details resolving that distance had previously blurred. The surface of the body was not smooth. Vast fissures ran across what might have been a shoulder. Formations like calcified wounds, each one the size of a continent, ridged the visible forearm. The hand resting on the throne's arm lay motionless. The finger that had moved during the rite sat back in its original position, or close to it, as if it had only needed to prove that it could. "How long to the anchor point?" 4 hours at current drift. 6 if I burn every secondary thruster we have to drag." Rask straightened. "This is your call. Holy Hazard Authority. The Confessor Marshal decides what happens when a sacred object becomes lethal. That's the charter. That's what you're here for." She meant it without cruelty. She was handing me the weapon I'd been carrying since I came aboard this ship and telling me it was time to use it. "I need to talk to 2 people. Give me 1 hour. You have 40 minutes. After that, I start executing whatever you decide, or I start executing my own judgment. One or the other." I found Pell on Deck 3, outside the archive alcove, braced against the corridor wall with the logbook pressed to his chest. The amber lighting made him look younger than he was, which was already young enough. He'd been running toward the bridge when the lurch hit, and had stopped when he saw me coming down the ladder. "The Sabotage. It's Severin? His people. He won't have ordered it directly. He'll have inspired it and kept his hands clean." I kept walking. He fell in beside me. "Pell. The partial seal. Ship alone. Reactor core. No crew. Hollis gave it decades, maybe more, maybe less. Is that enough?" "Enough for what?" "Enough for someone else to figure out how to fix the throne permanently. Some other expedition, some other generation. Better tools, better understanding." He stayed quiet for a few steps. The ship's secondary thrusters fired somewhere aft, a shudder through the deck plates, rhythmic, the engines fighting the drift in short, controlled burns. "Maybe, if someone comes back, if they know what to look for." He looked at me. "Confessor, if it can be dead, it can be killed again. That's still true. Whoever comes next won't be starting from nothing. They'll know the throne is a lock. They'll know the lock needs a key. They just need to find one that isn't made of people." The earnestness in his voice was hard to take. Not because it was foolish, because it might be right, and might was the most generous foundation I'd ever been offered for a decision this size. And if no one comes back? If the partial seal degrades and the corpse moves again, and there's no ship in range with the right mass? Then we bought time for the Alnary corridor, for the colonies, for everyone between here and the rim. He adjusted the logbook under his arm, that same gesture every time as if the book were an anchor. Decades of time, that's not nothing. Hollis was still in her workspace. The wire array sang in new tones now, sharper, more discordant, registering the ship's drift and the throne's increasing pull. Dust no longer circled lazily near the ceiling. It streamed in one direction toward the forward bulkhead, drawn by the same tidal gradient that was dragging the ship. I asked her one question. If I send the ship in empty, reactor core, no crew, and the partial seal takes hold, what happens to the corpse? She watched the dust stream for a moment. The contractions slow. The field stabilizes at maybe 60-70% of full output. The corpse stays seated. The finger doesn't move. Stars in the propagation zone begin correcting back toward their original trajectories over a period of years. A pause. It holds. For a while. How confident are you? Confident enough that I'd get on a shuttle. She plucked one of the wires, listened to it, and let it go. Not confident enough that I'd tell my son it was permanent. That was all I needed from her. I went back to the bridge and told Rask. Full evacuation, all personnel into the 3 auxiliary shuttles. Hollis to program the Requiem's remaining secondary thrusters for a direct approach to the throne's anchor point, reactor core oriented forward. The ship goes in alone. Partial seal. Rask absorbed it in silence. Her face didn't change. She'd been ready for either answer. She just needed to know which set of orders to give. The shuttles have independent life support for 72 hours, extendable to 120 on rationing. Navigation range is limited. We can reach the outer edge of the Alnary approach corridor, but not the corridor itself. We'll be broadcasting a rescue signal from unpopulated space and hoping someone hears it before the air runs out. I know. The survival probability for the crew, all 400, is low. Better than 0, but not by much. I know that too. She held my gaze for 3 seconds. Then she turned to the bridge crew and started giving orders. Evacuation protocol. All hands to shuttle bays. Staggered by deck starting immediately. Essential personnel last. No exceptions. One thing. I stopped her before she reached the comm panel. Broadcast the evacuation as a standard holy hazard withdrawal. Use my authority code. Don't explain what's happening to the ship. If Severin's people know we're sending the Vow into the anchor point without them aboard, they'll try to stop the evacuation. Rask gave me a look that was equal parts respect and pity. You want to hide the truth from 120 faithful who think they're being called to martyrdom. I want to get them on shuttles before they can volunteer to die. She keyed the comm. The evacuation moved fast and ugly. Rask's security team swept deck by deck, herding crew toward the 3 shuttle bays on the ship's ventral hull. Most went without resistance. The drift was obvious now, the amber lighting and the constant shudder of secondary thruster burns enough to convince anyone that leaving the ship was the rational choice. A few of Severin's more devoted followers hesitated, asked questions, demanded to speak to the cardinal. Security kept them moving. I walked the lower decks during the evacuation, checking compartments, making sure no one had been left behind or had hidden themselves. On deck 4, I passed the cargo chapel. Empty now, pews knocked askew by the rush of bodies leaving. Someone had left a handwritten devotional on the altar. The still shall not remain still. Weighted down with a coffee cup. The portable altar's devotional light still shone, casting a small warm circle on the metal surface. I switched it off and kept moving. On deck 2 I found the projection. Someone, one of Severin's people, or maybe just a frightened crew member looking for comfort, had rigged a display screen on the forward corridor wall to show the chapel's external camera feed. The corpse's face filled the screen. Vast, scarred. The features were not human, but they were facial. Brow ridge, something like closed eyes, a line that could have been a mouth sealed shut. The calcified wounds on its surface gave it the look of something that had been hurt badly a long time ago and had hardened around the damage. I stood in front of it for maybe 30 seconds. The face stayed still. The throne held. I didn't pray. I thought about the Vance Reach, the 9 dead, the children. I'd given those pilgrims 60 days because I couldn't bear to give them 0, and that margin, that kindness, had been the thing that killed them. The gentle option, the humane timeline, the choice a decent man makes when he can't stomach the necessary one. And now, I was doing it again. Partial seal, decades instead of centuries, shuttles instead of certainty. Hoping that enough time would be enough, because the alternative was using 400 people as ballast in a machine older than our species, and I couldn't do that. Not because it was wrong, I wasn't sure anymore whether it was wrong, but because I would have to watch. I would have to give the order and watch them fold into the throne's architecture, and then I would have to live as the man who did that, and I knew with the cold certainty of experience that I would not survive being that man. Not intact, not in any way that mattered. So I chose the weaker option, the merciful one, the one that might not hold. I switched off the projection and headed for the shuttle bays. Cardinal Severin waited at Shuttle Bay 2. He'd understood what was happening. He was too intelligent not to. And he'd come not to evacuate, but to stop me. 2 of his clerics flanked him, and behind them, a cluster of 8 or 9 followers who'd broken away from the evacuation flow and gathered around him in the corridor. "You're sending the ship in empty." His voice carried over the noise of the evacuation. Boots on deck plates, the whine of shuttle pre-launch cycles, security officers calling instructions. The core alone, a partial seal, a patch. "Get on the shuttle, Cardinal. You are condemning the galaxy to save your conscience. The full seal lies within reach. 400 souls, freely given. It wouldn't be freely." I cut across him. "You'd have to ask them, and you didn't. You disabled our thrusters instead." That landed. A flicker behind his eyes, not guilt but recognition that I'd named the gap between his theology and his tactics. He recovered fast. The divine does not require consent, it requires presence. Then the divine can make do with a reactor core and an empty hull. I signaled Rask's security chief, who stood 10 meters down the corridor with 4 armed personnel. "Cardinal Severin is to be escorted to Shuttle 3, his clerics and followers as well, no exceptions." Severin didn't move. The security chief stepped forward. The 2 clerics looked at each other, then at Severin, then at the armed men behind the chief. "You will answer for this," Severin said. "The Synod and the Admiralty will review your choices, but the true account will be taken by whatever sits in that chair, when it opens its eyes and finds your patch holding it down. You will answer to that." The security team moved in. One of the clerics stepped aside immediately. The other hesitated until a security officer put a hand on his shoulder. Severin walked under his own power, spine straight, expression rigid, into the shuttle bay and up the boarding ramp. His followers trailed behind him. The last one, a young woman from the galley staff, looked back at me once before the ramp closed. Fear and devotion in equal measure. She'd wanted to stay. She'd wanted to die in the throne. I'd taken that from her, and she would hate me for it whether we survived or not. I was the last one off. Hollis had programmed the approach vector from her shuttle, a remote link to the Vow's secondary thruster array, guiding the ship nose first toward the throne's anchor point with the reactor core oriented for maximum field contact. I stayed aboard to verify the lock. The bridge was empty, The corridors were empty. 11 years of my life on this ship, and in the final 20 minutes it became a place I didn't recognize. Not through any change in the walls or fixtures, but because the absence of 400 people turned it into what it had always been underneath. A machine. Hull and plating and a consecrated core, drifting toward a purpose it had been accidentally built to serve. I checked the approach vector one final time. Locked. I walked to the last shuttle, Bay 1, port side, and boarded. The ramp sealed behind me. Pell waited in the forward compartment. He'd saved me a seat. Or rather, he'd put the ceremonial logbook on a seat, and no one had dared move it. I sat down. The shuttle disengaged from the hull. Through the viewport, the Requiem continued its drift. From outside, the ship looked small. Against the backdrop of the throne and the corpse and the warped light of the Galactic center, it looked like a coin tossed into a well. The secondary thrusters fired in sequence, small flares along the hull, adjusting, correcting, guiding the ship toward a point in the throne's geometry that no human had ever approached. The ship reached the anchor point 3 hours after I boarded the shuttle. There was no flare of destruction, no visible tearing. The Requiem crossed a boundary I couldn't see, and the throne's field took it. The ship compressed, not crushed, not shattered, but drawn in, its outline narrowing and elongating as the stabilization architecture folded it into the gap. The reactor core went first, pulled forward into the throne's structure like a rivet seating into a joint. The hull followed, collapsing inward around the core in a motion that lasted about 12 seconds and looked, from the shuttle viewport, like a hand closing slowly around a stone. A gravitational pulse rolled out, sharp, concussive, radiating from the throne in a visible distortion wave that bent the light from every star in the field of view. The shuttle lurched. Someone in the aft compartment cried out. I gripped the armrest and watched the wavefront pass over us and continue outward, expanding, thinning, carrying with it whatever force the throne had just exerted to close its gap. The dust near the shuttle, rubble, particles, the fine grit that filled the space around the Galactic center, changed direction. It had been streaming toward the throne. Now it circled. Slow, regular orbits. The same lazy rotation Hollis had demonstrated in her workspace with cupped hands and a tap on the wall. Order re-establishing itself. Hollis's voice came over the shuttle's internal comm from Shuttle 2. Field output stabilizing. Contractions have ceased. Repeat. The cycling has stopped. The seal is holding. No one in my shuttle spoke. Rask, in Shuttle 3, acknowledged Hollis's report with a single word. The rescue signal was already broadcasting, an automated pulse on the emergency frequency, repeating our position and crew count on a loop that would continue until the shuttle's power cells died or someone answered. I looked out the viewport. The throne still filled the sky. The corpse still sat. The vast, scarred body seated in its restraint, head bowed, hands resting on the arms of a chair built to keep it from standing. The Requiem was gone, absorbed into the structure, invisible now, part of the lock. My ship, my quarters, my document safe with the holy hazard declaration sealed inside. All of it folded into the architecture of a mechanism I didn't build and couldn't fully understand, holding a body I couldn't name in a stillness I couldn't guarantee. In the aft compartment of Shuttle 3, Cardinal Severin was weeping. I could hear it through the open comm channel before Rask muted her shuttle's feed. The sound carried rage rather than grief. The voice of a man who had come to the center of the galaxy to free a god, and had been stopped by a man who chose a patch over a permanent fix because he couldn't stomach the price. He might be right. The partial seal might hold for decades. It might hold for centuries. Or the throne's field might degrade again in 10 years, and the next contraction cycle would begin, and there would be no ship in range with the right mass, and the corpse's next movement would be more than a finger, an arm, a shoulder, the slow, terrible lifting of a head, and the stars would scatter like sparks, and everything between here and the rim would pay for my mercy. I sat in the shuttle with Pell beside me, 130 strangers crammed into a space built for 60. The rescue signal looped, the life support fans turned, and the throne held its new prisoner beside its old one. For now, the corpse was still.